Welcome, everyone. Welcome to another live stream. 新年快乐. Happy Chinese New Year to all the Chinese folks out there and everyone else celebrating today. It's your host, Danny Dhaiphong. We have a wonderful show for you today, and we are going to get right to it. So, to begin, let's talk about how Vladimir Putin has been sending messages to Donald Trump. We could call them veiled warnings about what is to come for Ukraine. He said to the media that Ukraine has only about 1.5 to 2 months left if the spigot of Western military support is turned off. He also said indirectly to Donald Trump that Vladimir Zelinsky will not be part of any negotiations that Russia takes part in, despite this being a key part of Donald Trump's so-called peace plan recently leaked to the Western media. To discuss all this and more tonight is friend of the show, former UN weapons inspector and U.S. Marine Corps intelligence officer, journalist, author, and much more, Scott Ritter. Scott, thanks so much for coming on again this evening.
Well, thanks for having me.
Of course. So you actually just wrote about this peace plan that we know that Donald Trump, his team, has not reached out to the Russians, the Russian government, according to Russia itself. But this peace plan has been leaked to the media, Scott, and Vladimir Putin has already said he's not going to speak with Vladimir Zelensky, which seems to be a key part of this. Talk about what you mean, and I'll pull up your article about this, that this peace plan is doomed to fail from the outset.
Well, I mean, first of all, we have to talk about the preposterous notion that Donald Trump believes he has any leverage over Vladimir Putin. I don't know what Trump thinks his role is here. He has tried to distance himself from the Russian-Ukrainian conflict by saying that had he been president in 2020, had he won the 2020 election and been president in 2021, that this war would never have happened. He wouldn't have allowed it to happen. And Vladimir Putin, I think, in an effort to stroke Donald Trump's ego, has insinuated the same thing, except that's not the case. I mean, let's be honest. This is Donald Trump's war. The troop movement that the Russians were doing back in the spring of 2021 is because of policies enacted by the United States regarding Ukraine during Donald Trump's presidency. Let's never forget that it was under Donald Trump in 2017 that the U.S. Army began training in Western Ukraine, 1 battalion of Ukrainian troops every 55 days for the stated purpose of going east to fight the Russians to liberate the Donbass. That was the mission of the American forces. Under Donald Trump, hundreds of millions of dollars worth of Javelin missiles, Stinger missiles, and other military equipment were provided to Ukraine. Under Donald Trump, Russia was subjected to stringent economic sanctions because of their reaction to the right-wing banderist Nazis seizing power in February 2014 and attempting to eradicate the Russian-speaking populations of Crimea and the Donbass. Under Donald Trump, the fraud of Minsk was continued, was perpetrated. Donald Trump knew that Angela Merkel and Francois Hollande and then later Emmanuel Macron weren't serious about going forward with Minsk. He knew that it was a sham. He knew that it was simply to buy time so that he, Donald Trump, could train the Ukrainian army to fight the Russians. And so Donald Trump, it lives in a never land. The Russians know damn well what he did. They know his role, and they know that he can't be trusted. But they also know another thing, that Russia has won this war, and that Russia will win this war, no matter what the United States or Europe or NATO does. There's nothing the United States, Europe, or NATO can do to change this outcome. Even direct military intervention. NATO is incapable of projecting meaningful military power into Ukraine. So what does Donald Trump think he's going to do? There's a political opportunity here for Donald Trump to focus on a strategic outcome, which would be to engender stability in a post-conflict Europe by focusing on a European security framework that would be acceptable to both Russia and NATO. This is something that the Russians were prepared to discuss and negotiate back in December of 2021. But Trump isn't focused on that. He thinks he's going to come in and he's going to dictate the terms of conflict resolution. This plan that people are putting out isn't really a plan. It's the uneducated musings of a single individual, Keith Kellogg, who back in, I guess, the spring of last year, published this paper, a nonsensical babbling of distortions, manufactured evidence, just straight out lies about the Russian-Ukrainian conflict, total misperceptions about the reality of Russia. And from this, all the talking points that are contained in the so-called 100-day plan emerge. None of it's based on reality, and Russia will be dismissive of everything. And then, Trump, recognizing that he doesn't hold the strongest hand, then does the most absurd thing possible. He threatens Vladimir Putin. In a Truth Social post that he put out, he said that we could do it the easy way or the hard way. The easy way, of course, is the equivalent of a Russian capitulation. And again, just to show you the ignorance, the absolute ignorance of Keith Kellogg and those who are writing this, the plan they've put forward, the timeline of this, as if they're throwing a bone to Russia, has the deal, which is in effect a Russian surrender, being finalized on May 9th, Victory Day, the biggest holiday in Russia, the most sacred holiday in Russia, the most solemn holiday in Russia. And this year made even more so by the fact that it's the 80th anniversary of the end of the Allied defeat of Nazi Germany, a defeat that was brought about by the fact that the Soviet Union is responsible for engaging, destroying 60 to 70% of Nazi Germany's military capability. That war was won by the Soviet Union. Berlin was liberated by the Soviet Union. Oh yeah, for all those people out there that forgot, Auschwitz was liberated by the Soviet Union. There was Holocaust Remembrance Day the other day where they once again just ignored the role played by the Soviet Union in liberating Auschwitz and again defeating Nazi Germany. But so that just shows you how absurd they are. But the crux of this, the key of this, we could do it the easy way or the hard way, Trump said. The easy way is Russia surrenders. The hard way, of course, is the United States will sanction Russia, put tariffs on Russia, focusing on Russia's energy production, the large oil companies. Then Keith Kellogg came out, and again, underscoring just how ignorant he is about any aspect of the U.S.-Russian dynamic or how Russia relates with the rest of the world. He said, we'll lower the price of oil to $45 a barrel, and that will cause the Russians to lose billions of dollars. They can't afford this war, and they'll capitulate. And the Russians looked at that and said, nah, you don't understand. This war isn't about oil, so whatever you do with the price of oil, it isn't going to change. We have our strategic objectives that are linked to the national security of Russia, et cetera. But let's look at that $45 a barrel again. Why would he say that? He did that because I guess he did a Google search and he asked the question, what is the break-even point for Russian oil? And the Google response is about $41 to $44 a barrel. So he came up with 45. I don't know why he came up with 45, but that's the number he put out there. But the problem is that break-even point, there's two aspects of break-even for the Russians. They need to sell oil at around 70, 71 bucks to a barrel to balance their budget, because the Russian budget, unlike the American one, doesn't run on a deficit. They seek to balance it every year, and they do so because they primarily sell oil. But that's the balanced budget. The price that Russia pays to get oil out of the ground is the extraction break-even point, and that averages around $41 a barrel. So I guess what Kellogg is saying is we're going to collapse the oil market so the Russians can't afford to bring oil out of the ground. Except that number, the 41, is an average that takes into account the very expensive oil extraction that takes place in the north the polar regions where they have to get it out of the frozen ground and put it on ships with icebreakers and move it around to market. That's expensive. But the other part that goes into it is the very cheap extraction that takes place in the Urals and other, continental oil, where a significant percentage of Russia's oil comes from. And that oil comes out of the ground at between 12 and 20 bucks a barrel. So the Russians will be able to keep pumping out oil forever. Will they balance their budget? Nope. But see, the Russians can go 2 years without balancing a budget. That just means they go into deficit spending and they dig themselves a whole hell. We've been doing it. We got $37 trillion worth of debt. Russia doesn't have any, but that's okay. Now, in order to get it down to 45, though, how do you do that, Keith? I mean, what's your plan? Well, Donald Trump says we're going to go to the Saudis and we're going to get them to help us drop the price, which means the Saudis have to start overproducing even more than they already are overproducing. The Saudi break-even point for their budget is around 85 bucks a barrel. They're already losing money right now. So it's not in Saudi's interest to lower it anymore because they've got, but Saudi has a lot of, economic reserves. They're able to live off of, funds that they have, et cetera. But the Saudi extraction, what it costs for them to produce a barrel of oil is around $10. So you see, you can lower it to 45 and Saudi Arabia will be able to pump oil all day long because they're not losing any money pumping oil. They're just not balancing their budget. So to get the Saudis to drop it to 45 puts them in a bind, puts the Russians in a bind, but both of them will be able to continue to pump oil, which is the important part of this equation. It doesn't stop them from pumping oil. Now we come to the United States. Keith Kellogg failed to consider the following. Permian Basin, West Texas. If you've been watching Landman, a wonderful show with Billy Bob Thornton, it talks all about the oil industry and the difficulties there. The Permian Basin has two types of wells. You have the old established wells that are there that are pumping out oil regularly. And it's relatively cheap. It costs about 33 bucks a barrel to get the oil out of the ground. But all new wells drilled in the United States since 2020 are drilled in the Permian Basin. All new wells, all our new oil growth. And the price per barrel is around 66. That's the break-even point. So if you're dropping oil down to $45 a barrel and you're in the long game to try and crush the Russian economy, that means that you're going to be keeping this price over a sustained period, months, if not years. And what will happen is that U.S. oil production will drop by 1/3 because all of the wildcat companies, all the small independents who went out there to try and make money because the U.S. government said we're going to have stability and we're going to project $78 a barrel for some time now, fluctuate up and down a couple bucks here and there. They can put hundreds of millions of dollars of their money into the ground on the bet that they're going to get it out and make money. They all go bankrupt overnight. Boom, done. Drop the price of oil below 50 bucks and Permian Basin new drilling collapses. And 1/3 of U.S. oil production goes away. These people go bankrupt. And if West Texas goes bankrupt, the United States goes bankrupt. It's a problem. Did Keith Kellogg consider this when he put this number out there? Did the wannabe Treasury Secretary, the designated Treasury Secretary who talked about collapsing oil, did he consider it? Did Donald Trump consider it? The point is they didn't. They don't know what they're doing. They're trying to play a tough man's game, but they don't have the data points. They're just out there puffing their chest out and spouting nonsense. And, this is the reality. The hard way will be, if you go the hard way, it will blow back on the United States, just like the sanctioning of the Russian economy back in 2021, 2022 blew back on Europe and destroyed the European economy. Trump's hard way will end up destroying the American economy.
Well, I'm glad that you brought up this maximum pressure campaign that Donald Trump and his administration is proposing. I don't know if you saw, but Marco Rubio spoke with the EU's high representative, top diplomat, and also reiterated that they support, that the United States, Donald Trump's administration, supports sanctions on Russia, increasing them in order to force Russia to the table. Now, Vladimir Putin, Russia, has already warned that this is not going to work, that that they don't even pay attention to this. But at the same time, Scott, my question to you is this already an indication that the Trump administration is not serious about negotiations, or do you see it another way?
I think the Trump administration and the president himself is coming face to face to the fact that Keith Kellogg's simplistic formulations aren't going to work. There's been talk about a phone call between Trump and Putin, but that call hasn't happened yet. People keep asking why not, because they're not ready. Trump gets one chance here, one chance to go in there and prove to Vladimir Putin that he can be a broker for conflict termination. But this can only happen if Russia's terms are met. When Russia initiated this conflict, they said, we have some basic goals and objectives. One is that Ukraine will never, ever, 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 I think that's a Taylor Swift song, I'll never, ever, 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 but Ukraine will never, ever, ever be a member of NATO, ever. Not some 20-year waiting period, 30-year waiting period, 50, never, ever, ever be a member of NATO. Two, that Ukraine will be demilitarized. I mean, the Kellogg plan has the Ukrainian army staying intact, getting re-equipped, reinforced, rebuilt by the West. For what purpose? So it's that striking arm that Donald Trump tried to build up in his first term? No, the Russians say, no, it goes down to zero, and then we decide what level will be built up, probably nothing more than about 50,000 people to secure the borders. That's all Ukraine needs. Demilitarization. All the NATO equipment will either be destroyed, captured by Russia, or returned to NATO, but none of it will stay in Ukraine. And this is non-negotiable. I don't know why Trump doesn't understand this. Why do you think this war is being fought? And then the last one is denazification. And again, people have said this is lip service, but it's real. The Banderist ideology must be eradicated because it's a cancer. It keeps metastasizing, keeps reemerging. It must be carved out, the tumor destroyed, etc. That can only be done by overthrowing the current Ukrainian government, replacing it with one that's more compliant to Russia. There will be a change in the Ukrainian constitution and the composition of the Ukrainian government, and the people that currently populate the Ukrainian government won't be a part of the future of Ukraine. That's what denazification looks like. What part of this doesn't Trump understand? So, these are the realities that the Trump administration isn't grasping, and they're starting to realize that Putin's serious. I mean, Putin is sending signal after signal after signal. I mean, most recently, he didn't say that Zelinsky can't be at the table. In fact, he said, "Look, if Zelinsky wants to be at the table, that's okay. I can identify guys who can go to a table that has Zelinsky at the table." Zelinsky won't sign the document because Zelinsky isn't the president of Ukraine. He has no legitimacy under the Ukrainian constitution. It'll be the head of the Rada, the parliament, who will step in and sign. But Zelinsky will not sign the document. He won't be part of the post-Ukraine, world. And this is a non-negotiable. I mean, this is not, and if the United States wants to do it, what they need to understand is all Russia's going to say is thanks, but no thanks. Have a good day. We're going to continue advancing on the front line. And we've reached a point where correlation of forces where the Ukrainians are collapsing. Even the head of the Ukrainian intelligence service, who just a couple of months ago was saying, Russia's losing the war, we're kicking ass, we're doing this, has come out and said, we're done. It's finished. It's over. It's collapsing around us as we speak. There's nothing left. It's over. And that's the reality. And Russia's just going to keep pushing forward until everything collapses, and they will get the outcome they want. Now, for all those people out there who put the little Ukrainian flag on their social media, to say, oh, look at me, I'm such a good person because I care about the Ukrainians. Understand this. If you continue to articulate for the continued provision of military equipment to Ukraine, you're condemning hundreds of thousands of Ukrainians to death. Let me explain how this works, guys. Okay, right now, there's sort of a balance that's been reached, an equilibrium on the battlefield that's not to Ukraine's advantage. We're talking about a war of attrition where Russia has dictated the terms of the conflict on Ukraine based upon realities, when Russia has perfected the art of grinding the Ukrainians down. You know, normally when you carry out offensive operations against a defender, you want a 3-to-1, minimum 3-to-1 ratio, because that's the kind of casualties you're going to be taking. You're going to lose a lot more guys attacking a dug-in defended position. The Russians have never had that. The Russians, you know, when they even started this war, were attacking at basically a 1-to-2 or 1-to-3 disadvantage. But the casualty ratio has always been to the distinct advantage of the Russians. But they've gone from 3-to-1 on bad days to 5-to-1 to 7-to-1 to 10-to-1. I've been talking to Russian journalists that say today in some of these battles that the casualty ratio is 20-to-1. The Ukrainians just don't stand a chance. The Russians come in with superior firepower, total control of the tactical area, and they just basically come in, surround the Ukrainians, and blow them up in their bunker, causing the Ukrainians to either surrender or die. And it's a 20-to-1 casualty ratio. There are days when the Russians don't lose a single person dead in some of these major battles. That's how much in control of it is. Now, I know you're going to say, well, that's not what we're being told. They're starting to tell the truth now. The BBC has come out and done a 180, and it floated some numbers that are closer to the truth than anybody in the West has been willing to acknowledge. They're talking about 95 to 98,000 Russian dead. That's Ministry of Defense dead. That's probably an accurate number. But you have to add into that, Wagner. You have to add in some volunteer forces, the Donetsk People's Militia, Lugansk People's Militia, et cetera. By the time you add in all these numbers dating back to the beginning of the war, you're probably up around 140, 150,000 Russian dead. That's a lot. Remember, it took us 10 years in Vietnam to lose 58,000 dead. So here, this shows you the intensity of the war. Ukrainians have lost over 1 million dead, 1.1 and climbing dead. This is the real number, and nobody wants to acknowledge it, but it's real. You can't deny it. And the BBC is starting to say, yeah, that's the truth. Remember, we're talking about dead. That means now wounded. The Russians are probably a 3-to-1 ratio. So we can safely say 450,000, Russian wounded, that 600,000 Russian casualties overall. Ukrainians, it won't be 3-to-1. One of the reasons why that 1.1 million number is so big is the Ukrainians suck at getting their guys off the battlefield. They abandon their dead. There are dead down there buried that it's going to take years to find them when this thing is done. So you're probably looking at another 1.5 million Ukrainian casualties. So we're up around 2.5 million Ukrainian casualties in this conflict. This is real. This is the real numbers. And this is why Ukraine has run out of manpower. There's just nothing left. Nothing left. Yeah, and if you go mobilize 18-year-olds, they're not going to get any training they're going to throw in. But now Russia has this battlefield where the equilibrium is such that it's set. There is a system in place now. The Russians, Ukrainians, they engage, and basically they grind each other down at a rate where the Ukrainians get ground down a whole lot more than the Russians do. Then the Ukrainians withdraw, regroup, start grinding again. And this works as the correlation of forces is roughly, equal. But what's happening now is the Russians are accruing combat capability that's not being ground down, whereas the Ukrainians are going down. And so now this final stage battle, it's even more intense. The advantage is distinctly on the part of the Russians. This means that the final phase of the war, the collapse phase, is going to be extraordinarily bloody for the Ukrainians, extraordinarily bloody, because the Russians will basically get total event. Read the histories, for instance, of the collapse of Army Group Center during Operation Breakeven back in the summer of 1944. And look at how quickly German casualties, the Germans are on the front line, even with the artillery, the armor and everything fighting, their casualty levels are low. But when the Soviets achieve the breakthrough and the Germans start to retreat and they're pursued and surrounded and annihilated, their casualties spike. And this is going to happen to the Ukrainians. Their casualties are going to spike. It's going to be ugly for the Russians too. I always bring up to people the bloodiest month for the United States in World War II in the European theater wasn't D-Day June, the invasion of Normandy, very bloody battle. It wasn't December 1944, Battle of the Bulge, big, German counterattack. It was April 1945, the final full month of the conflict when the Germans were beaten, defeated. That's when we suffered the most casualties. Why? Because the Germans, even in their beaten, defeated stage, were fighting like cats and dogs. They were cornered rats. There was no place to retreat to. They were fighting to the death, and they turned every village, every tree line, everything into an Alamo. And this is what's going to happen to the Ukrainians. As they collapse, these troops are going to just basically do one last dig in, hold in, fight until they die. Why? Because Russians don't surrender. And the Ukrainians, at the end of the day, are Russians. They have the same mentality. They don't surrender. They will fight. They will fight to the death. So we're talking about the final spasms of this conflict being unbelievably violent with horrific amounts of dead. And anybody who says that they care about human life should want this war to end. But this war only ends if you recognize the reality that Russia has won the war. And this is something that Donald Trump so far has failed to recognize.
Indeed, Scott, he has definitely failed to recognize this. That the war has been lost, and I'd like your reaction to the latest scoop, as Axios has called it, that Ukraine is going to be receiving Patriot missile systems from Israel. But of course, this is a move by the United States and the Trump administration, which some have speculated is a way to get around this very unambiguous cancellation of foreign aid, which the ambiguous part about this is that military aid has not been spoken about so much when it comes to Ukraine. But here we have Patriot missile systems still going to go to Ukraine, despite what you said, Scott, that this is going to get incredibly bloody for Ukraine, even though it already is. So your reaction to this?
Well, first of all, let's be clear that the freeze on foreign aid is a State Department freeze on foreign aid. It's something that Marco Rubio has enacted. The Department of Defense has not put out a similar declaration, as far as I'm aware. The State Department doesn't control much of the military assistance that goes to Ukraine. If you recall, the military component of U.S. aid was done through the Ramstein Contact Group, which was headed by the Secretary of Defense of the United States. This is a Department of Defense activity. And so the monies that were allocated were primarily from the Defense Department budget and were managed by the Defense Department. And so when you shut down aid, State Department aid, it doesn't impact the Department of Defense activity. And the Biden administration made a big effort to push the aid that was approved into Ukraine. Not all of it was there. Much of it is still in the pipeline, still in warehouses awaiting shipment. But unless there's a State Department component to it, that stuff's still flowing into Ukraine. So the idea that Ukraine has had the spigot turned off isn't accurate. The problem is the follow-on, because again, this stuff goes in there, and I don't know how to describe it to people. The meat grinder doesn't just grind up meat; it grinds up equipment, and all this equipment that flows in is just going in there and getting ground up. So it doesn't change the outcome on the battlefield. The Patriot missiles, Israel had, dating back to 1991. Had received Patriot missiles from the United States, the old, PAC-2, initial PAC-3 versions of the Patriot. These were mothballed. These were put into storage because they don't, we're talking, that's what, 35 years ago. That it's old equipment, and the older missiles, the older PAC-2, PAC-3 missiles, likewise were put into storage, kept in reserve, just in case Iran wanted to do one, big true promise 3, they could bring these things out and try and shoot down some of the Iranian missiles. Right now, Iran's not going to be attacking Israel anytime soon, if ever. And the Israelis recognize that these weapons are just rotting in a warehouse, so they are going to make them available to Ukraine. And so 90 of these old Patriot missiles And guys, I'm stop getting excited. All those people with the Ukrainian flags, 90 missiles. Oh my God. Oh, this is wonderful news. Oh, they're old. Many of them have expired. And because they're old means that their performance isn't going to be, what you think it's going to be. They're not going to be able to shoot down the vast majority of Russia's newer missiles. They might be able to have some effectiveness against the Shahed type drones and things of that nature. But, this isn't top of the line stuff. This is, old stuff, much of it on the border of line of being expired, meaning that it's not even safe to use. The launchers that are associated with this are going to be sent to the United States, where Raytheon is going to refurbish them, do some maintenance, because they've been in storage. They're not frontline systems. They've been in storage. And who knows how well they've been maintained. So they've got to be worked over by Raytheon before sent on to Ukraine. It's going to take months for this to happen. So this isn't going to tilt the balance anyways, but we're talking, 90 missiles at, between $2 and $3 million each. We're, $270 million there, plus probably another $1.5 billion in launchers. We're talking over $2 billion worth of U.S. military equipment, none of which is going to change any outcome, all of which will be destroyed the moment it gets in to Ukraine, just condemning more Ukrainians to death, creating a false sense of protection that exists. The Ukrainians have a tendency to deploy Patriot missiles and then around strategic areas, and then put equipment and such in the warehouses protected by this. And what happens is the Russians do simple. I used to do it all the time. You just look at the photographs, you plot the Patriot systems, and you look at what they're protecting, and then you look inside that protected area for things, and you find out where warehouses are full of equipment, and you blow them up, because the Patriots can't stop you. But all they've done is concentrate the stuff that they think is going to be protected in this, in this protected area, and it's going to get blown up. These Patriots will make Ukraine weaker, will cost Ukraine more lives. That's the reality of it. We think we're playing a game that, where we're doing things that, give Ukraine an advantage over the Russians. It doesn't. It makes Ukraine weaker. This is the reality of this war. Everything we do for Ukraine makes Ukraine weaker, costs Ukraine more people, and allows Russia to accrue even greater advantage.
I wanted to turn your attention, Scott, to, I don't know if you saw it, there was an article in The Economist that talks about a recent Russian gain, the liberation of Velika Novosilka. And I wanted to go down in this piece to a point that's been emphasized, where they're speaking with a commander of the Ukrainian army, Pavlo Fedosenko, who is talking about the troubles that they had in this particular battle. He said they might throw Russia battalions worth of soldiers at a position we've manned with 4 or 5 soldiers. The brigade that make up the Donbass front lines are consistently understaffed, under pressure, and cracking. The front lines keep creeping back. He said, we no longer have tactics beyond plugging holes. We throw battalions into the chaotic mess and somehow hope to stop the grind. Scott, can you talk about what you know about this recent gain by Russia in this small town? And what is this commander talking about when he says plugging holes with regard to the ongoing fighting on the battlefield?
Again, I wanted to direct everybody to a Substack written by Maryat Kurillin, I think is his name. I apologize for butchering the first name, but Marat Kurillin. He has a Substack page. It's in English, and he puts out sometimes two very detailed reports from the front lines where he tracks it. He has an outstanding cartographer who actually, when they first started their collaboration, the Ministry of Defense came in and said, you got to stop making your maps because they're too damn accurate. You got to dumb them down a little bit, but they're still the best maps out there for for the conflict. And he has described this battle, and he's described others, every single battle that's done. The Ukrainians used to be able to come in and dig in, and then you get into this grind that we talked about. And you would do a rotation. So you'll throw 30 troops in to hold a position. They'll fight and they'll get wounded and all that, and then you rotate them out. You bring in fresh troops. You take those guys back, treat the wounded, get guys rested. They get in line. They get more, and so basically you just start rotating troops out. And the Russians are doing the same thing, but again, attacking is more difficult than defending. And what happens is the Ukrainians would be able to, because the Russians aren't going to commit suicide. If the Ukrainians can, find a position in a village or a town that they can fortify, they make it very difficult for the Russians. And indeed, in some cases, the Russians would just stop attacking because it was too powerful. And this allowed the front lines to be somewhat stable. So even if the Russians did capture a village, what the Ukrainians would do, because the moment in a heavily fought battle of that nature, the moment the enemy retreats, you're actually at your weakest point as an attacker when the enemy withdraws from a position, because offensive operations is very chaotic. You've lost communication, you've used ammunition, you don't know, where your wounded are, and you take a position, and if you haven't consolidated that position, you're very vulnerable to a counterattack. And so what would happen is the Ukrainians would pull back, the Russians would come in, then the Ukrainians immediately counterattack, bring in reserves, counterattack, and throw the Russians back out. And then you have to start all over again. And that's the way this war was dragging on. You'd get battles like for Bakhmut and other things where the Russians would put in a lot of resources, and they'd be able to grind the Ukrainians down and actually take ground. But it's very expensive fighting, very deadly fighting, and you're not making tremendous gains. What's happening now, though, because of this grinding down operation, the Ukrainians can't put 30 men into a position. They can send 5 or 6. And now here's the thing: 30 men in a position, you can have several pickets out there. As the Russians advance, the pickets notice the engagement and they start laying down suppressing fire, and then more troops can come out of the bunkers into prepared defensive positions and start laying down fire and beat back the attack. But when you only have 5 or 6 guys, they're underground, and so they'll come out and they'll attempt to lay down some sort of suppressive fire, but then the Russians will hit them with artillery, pull them back into their bunkers, and now the Russian infantry will surround them, swarm them, and then it's just a matter of throwing in grenades, throwing in mines, and burning them out, and then out they come. And that's what's happening now. The Ukrainians have no chance. These 5 or 6 guys are dying or surrendering, but they're not holding the position. The Russians will come in. It's a slow, methodical thing with overwhelming power. I don't know if it's a battalion against 5 or 6, but it might be a company against 5 or 6, and that's still odds that the Ukrainians can't win. There's no supporting arms coming in for the Ukrainians. If they do fire some artillery, the Russians are hitting them with counter battery fire, drones, suppressing that. The Russians' biggest problem is drones. The Ukrainians have been very effective at bringing drones in, but the Russians are now starting to counter those drones with their own anti-drone countermeasures, which include, by the way, going in with their own drones and finding out where the drone operators are and targeting them and killing them. The Ukrainians are running out of drone operators because it's one of those dangerous things. If you pop a drone up and you're out there flying a drone, understand that there's a couple Russian drones overhead looking for where that drone came from, and then focusing around trying to find a vehicle or an antenna. And then they start bringing in the missile fire, the artillery fire, the counter drones, and they just saturate the area and kill. And then when you lose your drones, you lose your fire support, and you're down in a bunker, you die. And this is what happened. The Russians came in and they just basically took the town because the Ukrainians ran out of people. There's nobody to rotate back in. The guys in the front have insufficient manpower. They often feel abandoned. They don't have ammunition. They don't have communication. Their commanders have left them. And oftentimes they'll surrender rather than die. But when they decide to fight, they fight to the death. And that's something the Russians have been telling me the whole time is, one of the things that surprised the Russians is that these Ukrainian defenders were being put in impossible situations. They don't stand a chance at all. And when the Russians would say, "Come out, brother, surrender," the Ukrainians say, "Your Russians don't surrender," and they fight to the death. And that's the thing that surprised the Russians that I've spoken to the most, is that these Ukrainians are just willing to fight to the death. They're tenacious bastards who don't give up. And it's impressed the Russians, but it's also created a killer mentality in the Russians now. There's oftentimes no mercy shown whatsoever, and a Ukrainian position, sometimes when it's defended to that end and the Ukrainians come out, again, I don't like to rely on movies, but I think if you remember in Saving Private Ryan, after the assault on the beach where the American troops were getting butchered, and they finally broke through and got to the trenches, and there's heavy fighting, and these they weren't Germans. I think they were from Ukrainians or Russians, came out and they tried to surrender, and the guys just gunned them down, because by that point in time, they hate them because you caused so much trouble for them. And then the other thing is, if you're a mercenary now, I think the Russians have an order, especially in Kursk, don't take mercenaries prisoner. And then also the other thing is, if you're a drone operator, you're not going to have a good time if you surrender to the Russians nowadays. I'm not saying this is justifiable. Of course, it's a violation of the law of war. I'm just saying that war is hell, and war is very violent right now, and it's a very tough situation for the Ukrainians.
Which is interesting, Scott, that you say this, because in the same article, they speak to a Ukrainian intelligence officer who believes that Russia has about 1 to 2 years left to fight as they are, and that nothing that they are doing will change the outcome on the battlefield, meaning that there will be no big gains at any point in the near future. Also putting in a little jab that Russians do not reward smart people, and cited an instance on the battlefield where apparently Russian forces broke the front line and had no idea that they did, and retreated for no reason at all. Scott, this is the kind of narrative that keeps on getting pushed out, even as they admit that this very important town was just taken and that Pokrovsk is next. So where's the disconnect here?
The disconnect is in reality. We're gonna be in for an interesting ride right now in the next days and weeks to come, because the Ukrainian propaganda mill that feeds Western narratives, such as the one that you're quoting from, they've been defunded. So they receive all their money from USAID, from the United States government, and all that money has been frozen now because of Trump's orders. And so the propaganda machine is going to start to break down. And this carefully manufactured narrative, which is not based in reality. Look, war is, it's very complicated. And again, the only reason why I keep bringing up TV shows and movies is that most people in your audience, I believe, have never been to war and haven't experienced it. But look at Band of Brothers, and when they talk about the Battle of the Bulge, there were episodes where they talked about incompetent leadership on the part of the Americans, and the mistakes that were made, and how Americans died because of that. But we won that battle, and we won the war. Now, if you had a Ukrainian propagandist running around, he'd just cherry pick all the mistakes, the bad leadership here, the failure to perform here, the cowardism here, and he'd say, "See, that's the Russian army." Because, my God, the Russians had a failed leader. They had people who didn't perform right, and they had some cowards over there. But that's not the Russian army. That's just aspects of a very large machine. The machine itself is functioning very well, and there's far more competent leaders, far more heroic soldiers, far more soldiers that can do their job professionally than there are those that can't. This intelligence officer, I don't know if he made this stuff up. They're guilty of that too. But let's say he didn't. Let's say he just went through his files and said, here's this report, here's that report, here's that report. See, the Russians aren't as good as we think you are. That's just cherry picking bad news, when that's like me going out into a farmer's field of corn and walking around and finally finding one, go, grubs, your crop sucks, you got grubs. But that's it. There's no grubs on anything else. And when he harvests it, it's going to be a great harvest. But I'm focused on the one or two, corn cobs that got grubs in them. And I say the whole car. Look, the proof is in the pudding. Okay, if this Ukrainian officer is right, then the Russians will lose this war and we won't have anything to worry about. But why is it that every time I look at the battlefield, every week the Russians have advanced and advanced and advanced and advanced? Why is it everybody's starting to come out and say it's over? The Ukrainians have no. Why is Budanov, the head of Ukrainian intelligence, saying it's over, it's finished, we're done? So I just, you have to be careful. These intelligence officers that get quoted by Western media, that's their job. Their job is to support a propaganda narrative that's being pushed out in the West to shape the mindset of the American people so that we still have the confidence in continuing to pour billions of dollars into Ukraine when there's, when it's competing with the legitimate needs of the American people here at home. That's what's going on here. It's not a real intelligence officer, giving a solid analysis of the situation. He's part of the larger propaganda game being played here. And those people who don't want to believe me, I don't care. All I know is that this time next month, the map will be different than it is today. And all of the changes will be to Russia's advantage. And maybe that intelligence officer, if he sticks around the front lines long enough, won't be issuing propaganda because he'll either be dead or captured.
Scott, given this reality on the ground, time seems to be of the essence here. And as we've spoken about, Donald Trump really isn't rushing, it seems like, to get into motion all of these plans that have been apparently leaked out and even stated by Trump and his team at points. Yet at the same time, my question to you is, do you believe that, given that this is the reality on the ground, we know that Russia has been very clear that it is not going to concede when it is in a position of strength? Do you see Donald Trump being able to change the posture that he's already laid out? Is this part of what we saw during the talks regarding Korea and the DPRK and South Korea and those talks? I've heard you say that those talks, though, however, were dictated a lot by the Koreans, by South Korea and the DPRK, and Trump took advantage. Trump doesn't seem like the United States and Donald Trump don't seem like they're in a position to take advantage of this situation. What do you think about this in terms of Trump's ability to shift from where he's already walking, which seems to be a very dangerous trajectory with regard to this conflict?
Well, Trump does have to be careful not being seen as being too conciliatory to the Russians, or else he'll be accused of, the same thing he was accused of in the past, caving into Putin, being Putin's puppet, things of that nature. So I think one of the reasons why he's taking such a strong stance is to say that, I'm in charge, not Putin, and, we're not doing Putin's bidding. But he has also come out and made several strong statements about, Zelinsky and, the fact that things aren't going well for Ukraine and Zelinsky. And I this is all speculation because we just don't know what's going on inside Team Trump. But what I can say is that every week that goes by, Kellogg's plan becomes more and more farcical and therefore, not viable to be presented. And the Ukrainian position becomes far more untenable and more likely of collapse. And I think, this 85-day window that Marco Rubio is putting on this U.S. aid to Ukraine is going to bankrupt it. You saw the Ukrainians they're in a panic right now. They've turned to Europe and said, we didn't think this was going to happen. We're not in a position. We don't have any money. We're out of money. The Clausewitz haters out there are going to hate me once again, but war is an extension of politics by other means, meaning that if you're focused solely on what's happening on the battlefield, the maneuvering on the maps, etc., you're focused on the wrong things. The politics of Ukraine. We've poured a significant amount of money into propping up the Ukrainian government in terms of payroll, in terms of paying off pensions and just funding society, to include funding the media. the Ukrainian propaganda machine. That's all done. That spigot's off. They're out of money. And if Europe doesn't pony up tens of billions of dollars immediately, it's going to collapse. And that's another way to bring Ukraine down, is to see the collapse of civil society. What happens when pensions aren't paid, when salaries aren't paid, when the whole country just runs out of money. The military may be out there; they might be getting more Patriot missiles, but salaries aren't being met. And this has a morale effect that can lead to the collapse of Ukraine from within, not just on the battlefield, from within. And I think if maybe one of Trump's strategies is, rather than trying to force a round peg into a square hole, which is what getting Zelinsky to agree to the Russian terms, it's impossible. Just let the round peg die. And that seems to be the direction that we're headed right now, is to let Ukraine die from neglect, holding out that we're going to punish the Russians and we're going to do this, that, and the other thing to the Russians. But the fact is, if all we do is talk about this and continue to fail to fund Ukraine's political and social programs, Ukraine collapses from within very soon, very soon. And that may be the strategy, is to get the Ukrainians. I mean, imagine how more simple this problem will be if you wake up one morning, you're Donald Trump and Zelensky's gone. He's either been killed, kicked out, whatever. He's no longer there. And there's a new leader, probably the head of the Rada, who's going to be calling for new elections. And suddenly there goes one of those contentious negotiating points. Who's going to be at the table? And now, now Trump can be smart and turn to the Ukrainians and say, look, we got to bring this thing to an end. These are the terms. You got to accept the Russian terms. That's it. Because the only option, we can't save you anymore. If we try to hold off and try to sanction, those sanctions won't kick in. It'll take months, years. You're gone in a week. So maybe you need to surrender right now, and we'll try and take care of you on the back end. That could be the strategy that Trump's taking, because I think even Donald Trump is starting to recognize that the Kellogg plan is nonsensical and a non-starter.
Yeah, well, no doubt there is. I never believed there was a possibility that Donald Trump could concede to Russia's security interests. I mean, ostensibly anyone can do anything, but given the political environment in the United States, given what you've talked about, Scott, how there's been a literal new Cold War, anti-Russia Cold War that has been sparked over so many years and developed over so many years. It's for me that seemed to be always a non-starter politically around Donald Trump, regardless of what he wanted. And the fact that he has, he's been so contradictory up until this point on this, leading to what seems to be a very slow process underway. It does seem like that Russia is just going to continue fighting, and there will be very small steps over what seems to be a very long period of time regarding the United States' role in any of this. And we just saw that, more weapons are going to go to Ukraine. It hasn't been shut off yet. So any final thoughts on this before we move on?
Look, it was just this, the Russians have a plan. I was surprised, to be honest. I love reading the comments here. Ritter said the war is going over in 3 days. Never said that. I did say that the Ukrainians could fold within a week of the fighting starting, but so did the director of the CIA and the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, because all of us were operating under the notion that Russia was going to go to war against Ukraine. Russia never went to war against Ukraine. It was always a special military operation. It took a while for me to latch on to what exactly that meant. But I always believed that it was in Russia's interest to get this thing over sooner rather than later. I always believed that Russia was, going to be pushing to get this thing wrapped up in 2023. Then 2024 rolls around and Russia's just on I'm not going to call it a leisurely pace, but there's just no urgency. They're just letting it happen, grind away. And I was reading the reports about, the economic planning that Putin was doing regarding defense industry mobilization, et cetera. By focusing on defense industry the way he has, he's superheated the economy, and that's causing some blowback in terms of inflation and other problems for the Russians. And my simplistic mind was, well, the sooner you can end that and transition back to normal economic functioning, the better. But the Russian planners were saying, no, we're going to continue to plan for this superheated, military industry driven economy through 2027 into 2028. I'm like, wow, why? Well, now we know the answer, because Russia has been playing the long game the entire time. Remember, it's not just the war in Ukraine that's going on. Russia is in the process of retooling a massive military expansion that began last year when Putin signed off on increasing the size of the Russian army from 1.9 million to over about 2.5 million, 600,000 new troops. They require uniforms, guns, equipment, ammunition. Everything has to be stockpiled and all that stuff. The Russian defense industry isn't just, recouping losses that have been, taken place on the Ukrainian battlefield. They've been rebuilding the total Russian army, and the Russian strategy or the plan is that won't be accomplished till around 2027, 2028. So Russia's ready to continue this thing through to 2027, 2028. The West isn't. You've got Europe right now panicking. I love, listening to von der Leyen and Kallas and all these others sit there and say, Europe has the greatest economic potential. We just haven't been living up to it. That's like me, I have the greatest NFL starting quarterback potential of anybody out there, except my 63-year-old arthritic knees beg to differ. And if I tried to throw one 40-yard pass, I think I'd rip my rotator cuff and go down. That's the reality that, Europe has no meaningful military industrial capacity, none. And neither does the United States. Neither one of us have even come close to, beginning to do the kind of transition from peacetime lethargy into, wartime activity. Russia's clicking along on wartime. Vodkinsk, the missile factory that I worked at when I was I didn't work at the factory. I monitored missile production from the factory. That factory now is, it's where the Oreshnik missile is built. And I was always amazed because I'm looking at Vodkinsk, and they have a lot of programs. They have the SS-27, they have the Yars, they have the Bulava, which is another missile. They're doing they're building the Iskanders. They're building a whole bunch of missiles, so they're sort of maxed out. And all of a sudden they go, we're going into serial production with the Oreshnik missile. And I'm like, but those SS-20 production lines and the SS-23 production lines that they've been converted and they're using them for other things. Now we know the answer. Russia's building a whole new missile factory to do this in Vodkinsk, a whole new missile factory. What are we doing? What are we doing?
That's well, I was about to say, Scott, for all of Trump's bluster and these massive executive orders, fulfilling all the promises, for me, it's we have on the one hand the big one, Ukraine, going very, 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 very slow, and maybe the ones that aren't told, like how about what's going on in the U.S. economically? How about improving people's lives? No, we're talking more about freezing all the money for getting rid of federal workers, whatever. But we're not talking about how to improve people's lives right here in the United States. So yeah, what are we doing? We're not building missiles, and we're not doing that either.
We almost had an economic war with Colombia. And could you imagine how pissed off Americans would be every morning going to Starbucks to find out that the price of a latte caramel souffle or whatever the hell they order nowadays, went from $7 to $14. Oh my God! And then Valentine's.
Yeah.
Do Americans know, all those fresh cut flowers that we see filling up the stores out there? You know where they come from, right? Colombia. They come from Colombia, and they're packaged every day. They get cut, they get refrigerated, they get thrown on airplanes, and they get shipped out, and they appear in our stores. And on Valentine's Day, we all wake up and go, oh my God, it's Valentine's Day. My wife's at work. I better run to the store and buy fresh cut flowers, a box of chocolates, and a card so that my wife remembers that I love her. And but now I go there and, you know, like most marriages, the wife's control the budget. So I might have $20 in my pocket or $40 in my pocket. But I don't want my wife to realize that I bought it that day. So I want to use cash. But now I go there and to cut flowers, instead of spending $30 for the flowers, I'm spending $70 for the flowers, and I don't have the cash. I have to use the credit card. So now I not only go bankrupt buying the flowers, but my wife realizes that I'm a forgetful son of a bitch who forgot about Valentine's Day. Trump almost ruined every relationship in America. I mean, this is the fact. Just because he wanted to be tough guy, you know, we've been deporting Colombians. Even in the Biden administration, I think last year there was 140 some odd flights. So it's not like this is a new thing, an American airplane landing in Colombia with deported Colombians. But Trump, because he wants to be a tough guy, had to put them on C-17 transports in shackles and then take photographs of them coming off, so they were humiliated. And I guess these two C-17s were inbound to Colombia, and the Colombian president turned on the TV and saw a C-17 land in Brazil and saw the guys come off in shackles. He said, that ain't happening here, and he sent them back. Trump is stupid. Why do we have to do this? Why do we have to posture to be tough guy? We've been deporting Colombia. Biden was deporting them by the boatload. I mean, it's not like Trump's invented something here. It's been happening before. But he had to do it in a way that humiliated people, that assaulted the dignity of the Colombian nation. And he almost got us into a trade war with Colombia just because he was trying to be stupid and posturing. Fortunately, the Colombians looked at the math and said, we don't really want a trade war with the United States at this point in time. It doesn't make any sense. And they got a compromise. The C-17s are coming in, but they won't be in handcuffs. And instead of military officers escorting them, they'll be using civilian personnel. But again, why does Donald Trump, why does his administration just have to be brain dead on this one? You didn't have to make it this hard. You didn't have to create an international scandal. All you had to do was do it the way we've always done it, where we have agreements with the Colombians and others to receive these people. But no, Trump had to do it the hard way. And we see the hard way always blows back in our face.
Well, we also have now 30,000 apparently people are about to be deported to Guantanamo Bay. So the torture chamber that has received international condemnation and occupies Cuban soil is now going to be apparently a massive prison for those who are being deported. So again, regardless of your position on this, because I believe that we should just stop the wars and make life livable in the United States. That's what we should be focusing on. Guantanamo, rather than even doing what presidents have failed to do over the course of the many years, Obama, Trump, Bush, not closing Guantanamo. Now it's going to be housed with many thousands of deported people. So any final thoughts? I want to get to the Middle East in a second, but if you have any reaction to that.
No, actually that's news to me. I have to
yeah, that was like that was literally, I think that was
you said, I'm just going,
yeah,
well, of course we did. I mean, let's pick the absolute worst possible move we could make and let's do it. And I love it. Where's Elon Musk and Doge? The Department of Government Efficiency. Do you understand how inefficient and expensive and stupid this is and it's not as though we don't have data points. We kept Haitians there. Remember when the Haitian boat people were coming over, we put the Haitians there. Very expensive, very ineffective. Don't want to do it again. Thought we learned our lesson, but nope, not the Trump administration. Stupid is their business.
Right.
Yeah, no.
Seems like Doja, a lot of it is going to be trying to target whatever flimsy services and government spending is happening for poor people, and, and the rest, when it comes to military security, all of this, that will continue to be boosted. Scott, I wanted to ask you, there was a incredible scene of 1 million Palestinians marching back to northern Gaza. We've, of course, have seen the imagery of Hamas and Palestinian resistance fighters with pristine uniforms out in public now, out from underground, of engaging in the ceasefire exchange to the cheers of the Palestinians there. And at the same time, we've had a huge shakeup of the Israeli military. Herzi Halevi, the former chief now of general staff, the Southern Command leader, Yaron Finkelman, and many others have been ousted. And while Israel is waging what seems to be a very violent military operation in Jenin and the West Bank, also is still committing atrocities in southern Lebanon, despite the ceasefire supposedly being extended there for whatever it's worth. There seems to be a much different mood now for Israel when it comes to the overall regional situation. And I wonder if you could talk about the military dynamic of this now, what we've learned over this period with this ceasefire in place and the regional situation being what it is as of right now.
Well, to be as simple as possible, and I'm sure I'm going to thrill a lot of people when I say Israel lost the war. There's just no ifs, ands, or buts about this. The Israeli army was defeated by Hamas. If you want to point to destroyed buildings and tens of thousands, even maybe more, of civilian casualties, that's just genocide. It's not a military operation. In fact, when this war first began, I said that the Israelis have been sucked into a Hamas trap, where Hamas will get Israel to destroy the infrastructure above ground, making it more difficult for Israel to maneuver. And meanwhile, the infrastructure below ground, the hundreds of kilometers of Hamas tunnels, will remain intact and allow Hamas to maneuver effectively below ground, popping up and killing the Israelis, destroying them, but death by 1,000 cuts. And this is exactly what happened. The Israeli military was demoralized. Order broke down when they went in there. This whole not notion that Israel is the most moral army on the face of the earth broke down immediately as the Israelis found themselves in a war they couldn't win. And so the only thing they could do was take it out on the civilian population. All order broke down. These people were murdering Palestinians, raping Palestinians, stealing from the Palestinians, and there were no repercussions because the Israeli government was calling the Palestinians human animals, and Israeli rabbis were legitimizing the rape of Palestinians, saying that it was the right of the Israeli soldier to do this, and many Israeli soldiers did in fact do this. This destroys the cohesion of a unit. Command and control becomes ineffective as the more strong-willed criminal element of the enlisted take over and encourage, murders, rapes. We've seen this in the American military. What the hell do you think happened with My Lai? Go study why Lieutenant Calley and the men of the AmeriCal division did what they did in My Lai. It's because the Viet Cong were out fighting them. The Viet Cong were frustrating them. And in the end, the frustrated American soldiers took it out on the civilian population, massacring them. This is exactly what happened in Gaza with the Israeli military. Total breakdown in ethics, military command and control, etc. And it's been devastating to the Israeli senior leadership, who now has woken up to the fact that they have presided over a literal genocide, that the Israeli army has become a war crime factory. And this is devastating for the command who is responsible for what happened here. And then for the Israeli population being told that their troops are winning, their troops are winning, their troops are winning, their troops are winning. Don't worry about the 45,000 wounded that are in Israeli hospitals. The Israelis, in modern military medicine, we have something called the golden hour. And if you can get a badly wounded, because a lot of guys don't die basically instantly in war. You bleed out. It's a slow death. It's the rare death that's instant. Normally, you're going to get hit, bleed out, and it's going to take a while for your body to collapse. So if you can get somebody stabilized and evacuated to quality medical care within an hour, that golden hour, generally speaking, the damage can be reversed and the life can be saved. Oftentimes, you don't want to save this life because they should have died. But the Israelis now have 45,000 guys, over half of whom aren't going to have quality life going on. The other half are going to be mentally wrecked, along with the hundreds of thousands of others who committed horrific crimes or saw horrific crimes being committed. They have to live with that forever. The Israeli military is emotionally devastated here. But the Israeli population, being told that they won this war, now wakes up to find out Hamas has come out of the ground, and they are there, larger than life, wearing fresh uniforms with their AK-47s and their green armbands, looking well-fed and strong. They weren't defeated. Not even close. Hamas today is stronger in terms of manpower than they were when this conflict started. They were able to recruit over, I think, 15,000 new fighters. And you go to the north, it's a little bit different story in the north, because the guys coming out of the ground there, they're a little skinnier. Their skin's a little paler because they've been underground a long time. But the commander of the north came out, and that's one tough SOB. I mean, and you look at the fighters that are coming out there, these aren't defeated people. This is the look of people coming out of a big, tough battle, the fight for northern Gaza. Understand that northern Gaza had been depopulated. That's why you have 1 million people wanting to go back. The civilians have been driven out. That was part of the Israeli strategy. Drive the civilians out, and you can defeat Hamas on the ground. They never defeated Hamas. Every day, Hamas came out of the ground and blew up a tank here, ambushed people there, death by 1,000 cuts. And the Israelis couldn't do a damn thing about it, because how do you maneuver on a moonscape of destroyed buildings? Where do you begin to go when you have rebar screwing up your radar looking for the underground tunnels? They never destroyed the tunnel network. And these brave SOBs from Hamas kept popping up from the tunnels, running out there and popping the Israelis. They were never defeated. They beat the Israelis. The Israelis had to retreat. And, one would have expected they would have left a graveyard. But out of the ground came the northern battalions, victorious, survivors. I mean, they didn't look like the guys in the South. The guys in the South looked like they've been going to the gym and eating some heavy protein meals. The guys in the North, they looked like Marines on Guadalcanal after a couple months of bad duty. But they were alive. They were victorious. They were unbent, unbroken. And now you're the Israelis looking at going, what the hell can we do? We dropped every bomb we have, with the exception of a nuclear weapon, on them. We did everything. We put in all our tanks. We sent our military in. We committed genocide. And we still didn't beat these people. That's the reality of what's going on there. The same reality is true in Lebanon. They didn't beat Hezbollah. And they're going to find, if they continue to insist on occupying southern Lebanon, that Hezbollah got the reputation it did. Remember, Hezbollah has beaten the Israelis twice. And they're going to beat them a third time, because they will evict Israel from this. Israel will never be allowed to retain this. And it could take weeks, it could take months, it could take years, but Israel will retreat from southern Lebanon. They will do so after suffering several hundred more dead, which will be devastating to the Israeli military. The troops are already demoralized. You know why there was a ceasefire in Lebanon? It's because the 7th Armored Brigade was brought in and told to take a major town, and they launched a full-scale assault, and they were beaten by Hezbollah. The Golani Brigade was supposed to launch a supporting attack. They were beaten by Hezbollah. The Agos Special Forces Unit, which specializes in southern Lebanon operations, was out in the field getting beat by Hezbollah every day. The best forces in Israel were getting beat by Hezbollah, and the rest of the Israeli army went, "We don't want to do this anymore. Give us a ceasefire." Netanyahu didn't want a ceasefire, but he asked for it. And so, the notion that the Israeli military is somehow victorious and no, it's a defeated military, and you see that with the purging of the ranks. And just wait as the stories will start to come out. Wait until you find out the truth about the hostages, that they all could have been released. And the ones that died were killed by the Israelis, killed by their own soldiers, targeted by the Israelis, murdered by the Israelis. this is devastating for Israel. The defeat they suffered in Gaza will go down as one of the worst defeats ever inflicted on the Israeli military in the history of Israel.
I've had the privilege and honor in October 2023, actually, as this was getting started, as the genocide was starting, as Israel was launching this horrific military campaign in Gaza, I went to the Kuchi tunnels a couple hours outside of Ho Chi Minh City or Saigon, regardless of what you wanted to call it. And you can still, they've preserved some of them. Of course, they've had to, refurbish them. They're quite old, but they preserved some of those tunnel networks, and you can go in. And I just want to remind that this is what Palestinians were doing in essentially in all a urban or rubble environment, much different than the Vietnamese countryside. So the fact that the Palestinians were able to pull that off to such a long period of time, I think exposes a lot about what Israel's can actually do, what its military can actually do. It can kill, it can have the Palestinian life expectancy in Gaza, but it cannot defeat the Palestinian people and their resistance. And that seemed to be demonstrated quite plain and clear here. But Scott, I wanted to ask you, because you just said that this is one of the worst defeats in Israel's history, but it seems like it's not over yet, because Israel still it's conducting this military operation in the West Bank. It's still committing atrocities in Lebanon, and it still talks about Iran in a very provocative manner, talking about the potential for a strike against Iran whenever it deems it wants to or can. So, Scott, you said that it can't achieve objectives, and we just saw this with the Palestinian resistance. It seems like every war, though, now for Israel is a long, prolonged war. Do you find that Israel may get itself back into a situation where it's fighting on many fronts? This seems to be almost inevitable. I'm curious on what your thoughts about this are.
Well, from from a political perspective, of course, that is a possibility, especially if somebody like Benjamin Netanyahu, whose only, path to legitimate governance is as the leader of the Israeli resistance against, the axis of resistance against the forces of evil who are seeking to undermine and destroy Israel. This is how he sold himself to the Israeli public. It's going to be a race in terms of who gets to establish what narrative first. I think the firing of these Israeli officers is the beginning of the creation of a narrative that will paint Netanyahu and his government as one of the most incompetent governments when it comes to the security of Israel. And if that narrative can be, crafted and sold to the Israeli public before Netanyahu has a chance to build his own counter narrative about how we defeated Hamas, we defeated Hezbollah, we defeated Iran, and we're securing Syria, and we can beat Iran anytime we want. So it's a battle of competing narratives. The best thing that could happen to Israel is if Netanyahu and his government collapsed, and Netanyahu was led away in handcuffs. And I saw him in court the other day. He's in trouble on a number of fronts, but to remove him from political power and replaced with a new government that understands the failures of the past and has to enact policies that are based upon reality and not artificial political contingencies derived from the need to keep Netanyahu in power, as opposed to what's best for Israel. Israel has a failing economy. They can't sustain this kind of conflict forever. Wars on all fronts require troops that, because of the way they've built their force structure, a large number of them are reservists. There's 64,000 businesses went bankrupt last year because the businessmen that are supposed to be running the businesses are instead wearing uniform fighting for Israel. There are no more startups in Israel right now. Nobody's investing money in Israel. The Israeli economic machine is non-existent. The port of Eilat is still closed. So these are the realities of the political realities inside Israel. And if you continue, It's one thing to have Donald Trump's special envoy tell Netanyahu, you can keep doing whatever you're doing in the West Bank, just keep that ceasefire in Gaza. But I hope people understand Israel's going to lose that fight too. Jenin isn't going to fall. Jenin will become the graveyard of the Israeli army, another graveyard. The settlers may have temporary successes, taking this hill, taking that hill, but Israeli society is on the cusp of collapse. Remember, before October 7th, President Herzog of Israel was warning about the real possibility of civil war, not civil conflict, not civil unrest, civil war with Israelis shooting Israelis. Ben Gvir handing out automatic weapons to the settlers, arming, creating his own army, so to speak. What happens when, in order to bring about peace, the Israelis are told you have to, start to tear down some of these settlements and push back, dismantle them, as you did in Gaza in 2005. And the settlers start shooting Israeli soldiers. Now you have a civil war. 600,000 Israelis have fled since October 7th of 2023. 600,000 in a nation of 9 million. Almost, again, I'm not the greatest mathematician, but, just short of, say, 6%. We could have more flee over time. I mean, if this economy doesn't work, they're going to flee. Hundreds of thousands have American passports and foreign passports. They're just going to go too. What happens when the demographics of Israel start to collapse? And you no longer have 9 million Jews in Israel, but you're down to 6 million. Then you're down to 5 million, down to 4 million. Meanwhile, the Palestinian numbers are up there, and the concept of a independent Jewish homeland becomes mooted. This is the danger. This is why, the CIA, said that Israel will be, 20 years ago, they said that Israel will be gone in 20 years. Everybody's looking at Israel right now saying, looks pretty healthy to me. Looks like they won a couple of wars. They dropped, they get John Wayne. Well, they dropped a couple 2,000-pound bombs on that guy Nasrallah, didn't they? And tough guy stuff like that didn't change the outcome. Israel has always shown it is very good at murdering people, but they're not very good at building. Israel's been around for 80 years. That's a blip on the map of history, a blip. I can go back throughout history and look at, political, social, economic constructs that have come together that, over time, and you'll say, well, gosh, that crusader nation only lasted 120 years. The state of Israel isn't going to last 120 years. It's going to be gone before you know it. It is literally, it's not viable anymore. It's isolated and it's falling apart. They are going to fall upon themselves and eat themselves because of the lies told by the Netanyahu government to the Israeli people about what was really going on in this conflict. And we haven't even begun to scratch the issue of October 7th and how the hell that happened and what happened. When the truth comes out about the Hannibal Doctrine, when all the lies that have been told about beheaded babies and raped women and all this stuff become apparent, there will be consequences. And those consequences will not be to the benefit of this failed nation state called Israel.
Yeah. As you were talking about this, Scott, it reminded me, we often talk about the United States in decline because in many areas it is indeed in decline economically. It's shrunk. Its influence in the world has obviously its legitimacy around the world, political chaos. We can go on and on and on. However, the United States has a history where it's a similar history, when it comes to, people coming to a land, taking it, all of this. Yet the United States is now 200 plus years old. It has never been in a situation where it's literally surrounded by people who want the United States gone. Israel is surrounded and occupying land that everybody, for the most part, wants out, excluding the compradors and the people that we talk about, the so-called Arab misleaders. But this regional war we talk about, Scott, that is something the United States never really has had to face. Israel has to face that now, and has to face this, what seems to be in perpetuity, because of what it did in Gaza and what it's doing. And also because, as you said, it's the political legitimacy of someone like Netanyahu, and who knows who comes after him, seems to be hinged upon this need for Israel to look like a tough guy and be able to try this, what seems to be a failed project from the start, this idea of a greater Israel.
You know, I was in Israel in the 1990s. Spent a lot of time in Israel from 1994 to 1998. Worked very closely with the Israeli Defense Forces, with their intelligence services, and got to know a lot of the senior Israeli military leadership and civilian leadership. I was a big fan of Yitzhak Rabin, not because he was perfect, not because he walked on water, not because of any of that, but because he recognized the danger to Israel of being Israel, meaning that if Israel continued down the path of, trying to impose its will on the Palestinian people without giving the Palestinian people any possibility of a better future, a homeland, that it would be the end of Israel. And so, Yitzhak Rabin was moving forward. Now, I know the Oslo Accords were imperfect. I know many people believe that they were negotiated in bad faith, and whatever you want to say. All I'm going to say is that the situation that existed in the Middle East in 1995 was so much better than the situation that exists today. The Israelis, at least at that time, had a very vocal political movement that was, articulating for peace with Palestine and the need for the existence of a Palestinian state. Yitzhak Rabin was murdered by Benjamin Netanyahu's acolytes. Benjamin Netanyahu, I personally believe, is responsible for the death of Yitzhak Rabin because he was there at a rally when his rabbi, extremist right-wing rabbi, quoted the Talmud, calling Yitzhak Rabin basically something about the betrayer of Jews, which basically, if under religious law, once you're labeled that, Jews have an obligation to kill you. And so he marked him to death. And then Netanyahu should have taken the stage and said, no, that's not what this is. Remained silent. And the assassin was in the crowd, listened to that, went out, and he murdered Yitzhak Rabin. Israeli intelligence has always held in their own internal things that the greatest threat to Israel isn't Iran, Iraq, and all this. It's Israel. It's Israel's extreme right-wing, politicians. And that's where we are today. Israel can't recover from what's happened. I don't think Israel can go back. I don't think there's a time machine that can take Israel back to the days of Yitzhak Rabin. I don't think there's a Yitzhak Rabin out there. Benjamin Netanyahu has imprinted his odious ideology on Israel since 1995, since the murder of Yitzhak Rabin. And he's governed or influenced governments ever since then. Israel today is totally imprinted with his hatred of all things Palestinian. Even the Israelis that are against Netanyahu aren't against the notion of denying Palestine a state. There's no politically viable movement inside Israel that says there is a need for a Palestinian state. Every Israeli appears to be united in the notion that no, there needs to be a greater Israel. That's an unsustainable, posture. And I just think that Israel has defeated itself. But proof is in the pudding. Time will tell. But I just don't. When I'm looking for hope, I'm looking for a Yitzhak Rabin type figure. I'm looking for, the old pro-peace with Palestine political movement that existed in the Labor Party. That's gone. There is no Yitzhak Rabin. There is no pro-peace. Everybody is greater Israel. Not, there's some that are more extreme, Ben Gavir, but there is no left wing in Israel anymore. It's center right, and it's all anti-Palestinian. And this is going to be the death of Israel because the Palestinian people, as witnessed by the resistance of Hamas, aren't going away.
Yeah. And I wanted to do our last segment, Scott, on what I find to be a very interesting parallel set of developments. On the one hand, I've heard you talk about this, Scott. Donald Trump has announced, and I believe now he is ordering the United States to build its own Iron Dome system in a kind of what's the word? Soliloquy to Israel in Israel's Iron Dome. He says the United States needs his Iron Dome in order to protect itself from its enemies and apparently their missiles. Now, at the same time, we've had a flurry of developments over the past several months and even the past several days. Of course, we've had Russia with this massive Oreshnik bombshell that came out, which, while it hasn't been used again since it was used a couple months ago, it is still a huge military development. And on the other hand, you had China coming out with DeepSeek and causing all this stir about AI and big tech and how China has, which we should have known by now, has won the tech race. I wanted to ask you about what you think about these developments in parallel, Scott, because on the one hand, you have the Trump administration says it wants to be a peacemaker, now talking about building an Iron Dome to protect itself from enemies, i.e. meaning there's going to be more wars that enemies would want to launch missiles at you. At least that's what he's insinuating. And while on the other hand, you have Russia and China so maligned in the multipolar world, so maligned in the media, yet coming out with these developments that are seemingly causing shock all across the West. What has been your impression of this that I present to you, this kind of parallel trend that we are seeing here?
Well, first of all, I have to back out of any meaningful discussion about DeepSeek and AI because I'm not a AI person. I mean, I know what AI is. I know, in theory, what it can accomplish, et cetera, et cetera. But I'm not an expert on it, and I don't want to act as if I am. Take advantage of your platform and start pontificating about something I'm just ill-equipped to speak of. I would say that, I would imagine AI deals with advanced computing, and advanced computing relates to programming, and programming relates to math. And when you take a look at the International Math Olympics that are run every year, the teams that tend to dominate are Chinese teams and Iranian teams. So I would never downplay China's abilities to, the intellectual capacity of China to do these things. I can also say that, I guess there was a while ago we denied China access to a Dutch-made lithograph machine, which is used to make advanced computer chips. This machine was used in Taiwan, and that's why Taiwan had one of the, was able to have this edge in producing a particular size of a chip that was useful in advanced electronics. And we decided that China was going to be denied that, and our goal was to retard the Chinese chip building capability. And all China did is, when you have a nation of, I don't know what it was, 1.4 billion, there's a lot of Chinese, a lot of smart Chinese, they had the ability to say, okay, well, let's just get 3 million of our top people together and let's work with this. Let's just start working our way through this thing. And my understanding is that China now has that capability and better. That, we never win when we try to pretend that we're smarter than the Chinese, because all that does is it stops our own ability to advance. Instead, we become complacent, saying, "Oh, we got them beat. They're never going to catch up." Instead of saying, "Oh my God, they're catching up, guys. We have to work harder. We have to move on to this next level." Joe Biden's trying to put G4 technology. One of his things about the Build Back Better was, to bring in a G4 internet technology to America. China's, got G5 in and they're moving to G7. So, I just would say that I would never bet against China on the AI market. I wouldn't bet against Russia either. Here's the thing. Now we're getting an area that I'm a little bit more comfortable talking about. The Russians do theoretical science, theoretical physics better than just about anybody. They have some of the best theorists out there, and they're also better at taking theory and turning it into reality. You know, in the United States, we tried to do something, we call it DARPA, the Defense Advanced Research Projects Agency, where we pour money in and they brainstorm to put. DARPA sucks. It really does. It's not very good. It takes a long time. It costs a lot of money. The Russians, let's look at the Oreshnik missile here. The Oreshnik missile incorporates advanced solid propellant technology. That means that the Russians have improved the burn characteristics of the solid fuel so that you can get high burn rates, but without building a bigger engine. But they've also done other things, because to defeat a boost phase intercept, that is, we have built Navy vessels, the Aegis class destroyers that are sailing around the world, and we've positioned them. We even sail them up through the Northern Passage. And the idea is, if a Russian ICBM is launched, we can fire this SM-6 missile up to intercept it. Now, again, that requires, radars, intercept algorithms, etc. But what the Russians have done is they've built a solid rocket engine that can change its pace, so it can fire up quickly, slow down, fire again. So it disrupts any of that as it moves forward. We're not even, man, we're using Estes model rocket engines in our stuff. The Russians have gone into grain design, carving in little holes. All this theoretical physics, they're doing it, and this technology is incorporated in all of their advanced missiles, and it's in the Oreshnik as well. So the Oreshnik missile incorporates some of the most advanced solid propellant technology the world has ever seen, stuff that in the United States we can't approach. The Russians are already doing it. They're well ahead of us. But you get to the actual warhead itself, we still don't know what the hell happened. I mean, Theodore Postal, who's one of the smartest guys out there for this, is still trying to figure out what the hell happened. The Russians are just gradually, they're throwing out a couple things here, a couple things there about what, but we still don't know what happened. We don't know what the composition was of these slugs that were released, that came raining down, the hazelnuts that came raining down on Dnepropetrovsk. They still won't talk about what the true impact is on the ground. How deep did they go? What damage was done? The Russians have been doing advanced materials in the realm of how materials work at high speeds, which is very important for hypersonic weaponry. And they are doing things that change how you think about hypersonics. We can't get a damn missile to fall off a B-52 and start. We have trouble, getting anything to work. And one of the problems that we have is the temperatures. When things superheat, that affects guidance and control. It affects everything. The Russians apparently have made advances in these exotic alloys, ceramics that have solved these problems. This is why they not only could have the Oreshnik come in, but they have something called the Avant-Garde, Project 4202, Yuri 1, Yuri 2, or Yuri 71, Yuri 74, I don't know. But this is a, hypersonic, glide vehicle. We don't have anything that even resembles this. I mean, Trump can sit there and well, we had the super duper duper. I don't know what he called it, something like that. And the Russians stole the plans. And I'm like, no, they didn't. The Avant-Garde 4202 comes from the technology that was being developed in the final years of the Soviet Union, put on ice because of a lack of funding, then brought up and updated by the Russian physicists who continue to do critical theoretical physics works in their defense industry, even in the 90s and early thousands. Whatever the Russians took from the United States wasn't about stealing technology that would be adapted. It was about finding out what Russian technology the United States had stolen and adapted to it. This is why, you saw right about that time, the Russians started arresting scientists who had been working with Europe, with NATO. These scientists were from the avant-garde projects, from hypersonic projects, and they had been cleared to discuss certain aspects of their talk. But because at that time the belief was we had good relations with the West, they went beyond what they were cleared to do. And they may have gotten away with it if relations stayed good. But instead, what happened is relations went bad, and people started to say, why are the Americans doing this, that? Their intelligence guys got a hold of the plans and went, somebody's talking. They went back, reverse engineered it, and said, you guys talked out of school. We're arresting you and charging you with treason. It's not about Russia stealing American technology. It's about America trying to steal Russian technology. The Russians have us beat. And now we can go, across the board. I don't want to bore everybody with this, but you remember when they were talking about the Russians taking washing machines so they could get the chip and put it in?
Yep.
Never happened. Now you have the European Union sanctioning Xboxes and PlayStation 4, I guess, because apparently they believe that the Russian drones can only be operated using the gaming consoles on this. Well, go fly a Russian drone. It ain't flown with a gaming console, I'll tell you that. But the West has no regard whatsoever for the reality of the advances that Russia and China have made in their respective defense industries.
No, we're seeing just this massive progress being made here, Scott. Russia in the realm of military tech, China in the realm of advanced high tech. And I wanted to ask you about, in the context of BRICS, because what have we heard in the media? It's Russia can't, Russia's military can't hang, China can't innovate. BRICS is just a very small thing. And now we're in the Trump administration, and despite all of the bluster of tariffs and sanctions and all of this, it seems like none of these countries leading this development are very worried about this, and that they're moving full steam ahead. What do you say?
First of all, the notion that BRICS is somehow fake or been overplayed, I don't know. Tell that to the Indonesians, tell that to the Malaysians, tell that to the Thailand government. They've all decided that BRICS is the future. They're turning their backs on ASEAN. They're turning their backs on the G20, where Indonesia was positioned to be a major player. Instead, they're saying the future is BRICS. And that's the reality. The future is BRICS. BRICS is a long-term project. Things aren't going to happen overnight, but things are happening today that are building on a foundation that will see BRICS surpass significantly the economic potential of the G7, of the United States, of everybody. I mean, this is the reality. And if you're not paying attention to it, then you're blind. Let's talk about another thing here. I'll just throw a thing. I just want to, before we do that, you asked me about Iron Dome. I'll just quickly say, Iron Dome isn't going to work. First of all, it didn't work for the Israelis.
Yes,
what are we Iron Doming ourselves for? I mean, where is this missile threat where are these missiles coming from? We already did this once. That's why we have an anti-ballistic missile treaty. We tried to do the Sentinel missile defense system, and we couldn't do it. It was too expensive. We poured in billions, and it just doesn't work. So we said, rather than waste money, but now we've reinvented the Oreshnik missile that we just talked about. The Russians are giving the Ukrainians or the Belarusians this summer a regiment. They're getting 10 launchers, 9 launchers to a regiment, 10th launcher is a training launcher for their missile forces. But that's 9. They can have nuclear capability or conventional capability. But the bottom line is there ain't nothing in Europe that can stop the Belarusian Oreshniks. And the Russians are going to be deploying their own multiple regiments. So Russia will now have these strategic intermediate range missiles, and there's no missile defense system in the world that can touch them at all. The Russians, if they follow their Cold War thinking, which I think they're going to do, are going to deploy at least a regiment out to Chukotka, out in the extreme Siberian way, so that they can attack our missile defense systems in Greely Air Base in Alaska. We can't defend it. They'll take out those. Then they can move in and they can hit almost all of the west coast of the United States and central United States from Chukota. Iron Dome isn't going to protect. There's not a missile system in the world that can protect against that. What happens if the Russians deploy Oreshnik in Venezuela? If the United States deploys Dark Eagle in Germany, as we're planning to do in 2026, and Trump is bragging about this, what happens when the Russians deploy Oreshnik in Venezuela? And now every part of the United States will be threatened by a missile that we have no defense. And, Pete Heads can sit here and talk about building an Iron Dome. The technology doesn't exist, Pete. And hopefully Doge comes in and says, no, we're not going to spend $1 trillion on a missile defense system that isn't ever going to work. But this is the reality. This is this kind of stupidity. Donald Trump got a stupid idea in his head about missile defense, and he sold it to his defense secretary, who's now going to try to turn this stupid idea into a reality. The technologies that will be available to Pete Heads through the Iron Dome system are technologies that didn't work against the Iranian missiles and can't work against anything the Soviets or the Russians bring to bear. It's a huge waste of money. Huge waste of money. Now we move on to I shouldn't have gone off on that tangent because I had something brilliant to say. Remind me of the question again, and I'll where were we wrapping up on? We were talking about.
We're talking about the the initial question was your impressions of these parallel developments, the rise of BRICS, China, Russia, beating these narratives of BRICS is too small. BRICS is small and insignificant. Russia can't militarily hang with the West. China can't innovate, and its progress is all insignificant as well. So it's really just your take on this, given that we are seeing these massive changes happening as Donald Trump comes in with all of this bluster, the Iron Dome, and he's talking about tariffs on everybody, and especially BRICS in the multipolar world.
Yeah, I had something on my head that I was pretty proud of the fact that I came up with it, but then I went off on the Iron Dome thing and I just flushed it. So maybe you'll come to me in the middle of the night. I'll wake up and say, "Oh, Danny, this is what I was going to say." But I think we leave it with this: the United States is look. Donald Trump has been given a unique opportunity, a unique time in history where the United States can become a very relevant player on the global stage. And I know that a lot of people aren't happy when the United States flexes its muscles, but I do believe that we need to break the failed paradigm of the past. The rules-based international order that Trump recognizes is the problem, not the solution. And stepping on some toes is okay. Maybe these toes need to be stepped on. I'm not afraid of alienating the European Union. I'm not afraid of turning our back on NATO. I'm not afraid of flexing our muscle where, this is, now I came to it. Bing, here we go. But this now is going to show you why Donald Trump is going to fail. You see, one of the toes he wants to step on is the Panama Canal. And apparently he's serious. I mean, we are going to see a military operation to take over the Panama Canal. Why? I mean, just listen to little Marco Rubio. The Chinese are controlling this thing. The Chinese companies are taking over. The Chinese can shut down the Panama Canal. And, 40% of our shipping goes through it. We can't allow this. This we built it, our blood, our blah, 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 blah. Except here's the problem. China just built a multi-billion-dollar port in Peru. This is a port that's designed to maximize container trade. So giant, huge container ships are coming from China. They're going to come to this port, and this port is designed to get these containers off and onto high-speed rail lines that take them from Peru to Brazil. Now, if normally you're a Chinese container ship, you're going to come down and you're going to cross the Pacific, and then you're going to queue up at the Panama Canal, go through the Panama Canal, and then navigate up through the Caribbean Sea around South America, and you come to a Brazilian port. Long route, big bottleneck. United States could close that down. Well, China is now coming to Peru, offloading all their containers onto trains. They're going to take them to Brazil. They just made the Panama Canal moot. China doesn't need the Panama Canal. China doesn't want the Panama Canal. Yet Donald Trump's going to commit geopolitical suicide by invading the Panama Canal on a false pretense, when what he should really be worried about is this Chinese port and the Chinese high-speed rail lines. But the problem is, Donald Trump says that he wants to make the future of America about competing with China. Have you been on an American high-speed rail? I mean, they claim there's one called the Acela train.
Oh, God.
The Acela train, it goes from New York to Washington, D.C. and back. Sometimes when I go to D.C., my only choice is to get on the Acela train, and it's too bad because they end up charging me, $150, $200 more for this ticket, for the thrill of being on a high-speed train that can't go high speed because the rails can't support it. Have you ever walked on the Acela train? When they, cafe car is 2 cars up on the right, and you're sort of hungry because you didn't have enough time to get the sushi at Moynihan Station. So now you're walking up to get to the cafe car, and you're just banging back and forth. Now you're on a high-speed train. Now, but it can't go high speed because if it goes high speed, it's going to derail. You're just banging head up against the bulkhead. And God forbid you buy food. Now you're trying to come back. You're tripping, spilling your hot dog on people. I mean, it's a mess. This is the high-speed train. You get down Philadelphia, and I start crossing myself, even though I'm not religious, because Philadelphia has these turns where the rails don't work. And if you don't slow it down right, off the train goes, and you're going to die. You're throwing your life away when you get on the Acela high-speed train between Washington, D.C. and New York City. We don't know how to do it. China, on the other hand, has been building high-speed trains forever, and they work like a champ. I haven't been to China. You have. Have you been on a high-speed train in China?
I've been on.
I bet you when you walk
yes.
on it, you're not banging your head around. It's sort of like you can put a glass of water on your head and walk, and it's not even going to shake.
There are videos of people putting a coin on its standing up a coin by the windowsill of the train and watching it balance because there isn't.
Yeah, so the Chinese are going to go to South America and build a high-speed rail line connecting Peru with Brazil, and we can't compete. You know what we did? This just puts Joe Biden and Tony Blinken in the proper light. As China built this port and were bringing in their test ships to offload, and as they began to build this high speed, in order to compete, what did the United States bring to bear? We went to Sacramento, to Cal Transport, and the commuter train line they had coming out of Sacramento, moving down, that was built in the 1980s, old diesel locomotives and such. They were now being put into retirement because we can't use them anymore. They're too old. We took those up and we gave them to the citizens of Lima, Peru. And we said, here, the United States is now helping you create rail connectivity within the city of Lima. So you can use our 50-year-old diesel technology that's going to break down next year. And there are no spare parts because we don't make them anymore. But don't worry about that. This is America helping you. That's how we compete against the Chinese, who are building a brand new high-speed rail line connecting Peru with Brazil. We're losers, man. We're losers. I mean, if Donald Trump wants to compete, build a high-speed train, learn how to do that. But we can't. Look at the expense. They're trying to build one on the West Coast, connecting, I don't know, what, LA with San Francisco or something like that. How many billions have they put into it? It doesn't work, and it's never going to work.
It's not built.
What's wrong with America? Why can't we do this? Get back to defense. We're trying to build the Sentinel missile. It's the ground-launched ballistic missile defense system. I mean, my God, it's going to replace the Minuteman III. We need this baby. We're never going to build this missile. I mean, eventually we may, but it's not going to get done for a long time, for over 10 years. And when it gets done, it's not going to work because we don't know how to build things anymore. We don't know how to do anything. And it's going to cost $1 trillion to make this thing. And people are, Scott, that's a lot of money. You're exaggerating. No, I'm not. It's only supposed to be like $120 billion. But now, they put in the budget. They're starting to lay it down, and they had to stop it because the costs were spiking, because all the defense industry knows how to do is do a low bid and then slow roll it, come in with a price increase that Congress always approves. And next thing you know, instead of being 120 billion, it costs 600 billion. I think this thing's going to cost you more than $1 trillion. Look at the F-35 fighter, one of which just fell out of the sky in Alaska yesterday or today. $85 million. Boom, gone. Why? Because it doesn't work. It doesn't work. We don't know how to build things anymore. And the things we build cost too much money and they don't perform right. Why can the Chinese build high-speed trains and we can't? Answer that question. And Elon Musk, you're a smart guy. Elon, why can't we build high-speed trains? You were so clever to get that booster to come down and get captured. Yay, Elon. I was impressed. Build a high-speed train. That's what we really need. I mean, it's cool to go to Mars, and you got the money. It's your money. Do what you want. But you know what helped the world? What will help America? Build a high-speed train. I challenge you. Because the Chinese can, and you can't.
Yeah. Well, Elon Musk knows China. He has a factory there. He goes all the time. He spends time there. He should know how China is able to do this. A big problem for Musk, though, and we can close on this, Scott, is he runs a big monopoly called Tesla. And one of the things that Elon Musk does not have the luxury or the desire to take advantage of is industrial policy, which China has a lot of, which is government backed. So in China, high-speed trains, they're all produced by state-owned companies. The electric vehicles were not produced by state-owned companies necessarily, had industrial government policies which incentivized their production, which allowed for the massive production of these cars and the lowering of their prices. So there was more of a consumer base for them. While Elon Musk has produced all these Teslas, but not a lot of people buy them because they cost 50, 60. The best ones cost 50, 60,000. Hard to buy. They're not mass produced in that way. More people drive Teslas in China than they do in the United States. And it's because of the industrial policy in China, which says, okay, if you're going to produce these cars, there needs to be a consumer market for them. There also needs to be high competition, and the government has to support this. But when you have Rubio, Trump, but even before them, Biden was the same way. Say, no, it's cheating. They even view industrial policy as cheating now. So it's a tough spot to be in for the United States because it's cheating. It wasn't cheating in World War II when the United States decided to
when we
use industrial policy. Yeah. But it's cheating now. And so the United States, how could the United States?
I have a question about electric cars since you've been to China.
Yeah.
And, because to me, again, I'm as simple as it comes. I'm a very basic person. And electric cars sound nice, even if you can convince me that their carbon footprint of producing an electric car is lower than, a carbon burning, whatever. Okay, let's just assume that it is. Okay, right. I'm willing to believe that. I know when I go shopping that they have some electric charging stations. Some of them are made by Tesla, some are generic, and people with electric cars can pull up there and charge in. I guess it's credit card driven. It's like buying gas. You have to, buy electricity, but whatever. And I know when I go to Stewart's, there's some. And I know when I travel down the thruway, there's supposed to be some, but there's not always. And I'm always nervous about that, about, what happens when you are out and you run out of, I know what happens when you run out of gas. And so I can plan my trip around, gas stations, and I can have a 5-gallon can of gas in my car if I need it. But when you run out of station, I heard the Chinese have taken a whole different approach to this, that they don't do the charging stations for long trips. They have battery replacement stations. So when you do your trip, if you're driving and your battery's going low, you just turn to your machine and go, where's the next battery replacement station? And they go, whatever, it's over here. And it guides you there, and you drive in, and it's like going to Jiffy Lube. You drive in up there, bam, battery out, new battery in, and you drive out in the same speed. And I'm like, if this is true, this is revolutionary. That means that they have actually solved the problem of the biggest problem in the mindset of most Americans of electric cars, which is the inconvenience of charging and the infrastructure of charging. If all you have to do is drive into a battery gas station and get your battery swapped out, boom. Is this true? Is this how they do it?
I mean, what's so interesting when because it's hard in China actually to not, if you get into a car, you're 60 to 70% of the time you're going to be in an electric vehicle because that's how prevalent they are there now. And so last time I was there, I was talking to my contact, and he about this very same problem that you were talking about, right? How there's just no charging stations in the United States. They're not being invested in. People find it costly, too much time. It takes too much time to do it. Where do you put them? All of this, and it was almost like a funny. It was almost like a funny point for him because um, I'm not sure about the battery replacement stations, but what I do know is that in China, especially in the cities, there are charging stations everywhere, and they are different though. It's not the same as, like, for example, a family member of ours has one literally like in their, you call it like their yard, in their actually in upstate New York, and it's not like this. Most charging stations are actually inside of public areas, and they're everywhere. And whether it's malls or things like this, and you go and you just park your car, you can leave it. But the thing about Chinese EVs is that they're better cars because they've been able to make advancement after advancement because there's been a lot of incentives around this. While Tesla has actually fallen way far behind, the one American company that is making these things. And so actually charging and things like this doesn't take, it's not as cumbersome as a process anymore because the cars are just better. They run for longer. And when you do need to charge, you're not charging for as long because they can go farther. So a lot of the best EVs in China, they can go 500 kilometers. Now they're talking about 1,000 kilometers before the next charge. So actually charging doesn't take that much time because you're rarely ever going empty. Well, in the United States, a big challenge has been because we are also such a drive heavy society. If you are to go long distances, yeah, it can be a problem because you have to charge before you can go that long distance, and then you have to stop and go. And if you're going in a certain part of the United States, you're not going to have any charging stations at all because the United States is the United States. It's very uneven. You might have some in upstate New York, you might have some in New York City, but you probably won't have many, the further out you go.
Scranton, Pennsylvania.
Yeah, I don't think it's Scranton. You're going to have any charging stations for EVs. So all of that is to say is that it's just so much easier there. Like he would park. There's a station right there. Sometimes it's manned by people, sometimes not. And that you just like plug it in, you leave. It takes like 30, 45 minutes. You come back and, you're good to go.
I was in Moscow last year and the year before, but last year between December and January, the taxis or the car services that you order, traditionally the Russians like they have the most modern BMW or Mercedes thing. Now I'm a guy, I bought a Mazda CX-5 a couple years ago, and it's the first car I ever had that has the video screen when you back up. It's like, oh, TV backing up. My God, I was so impressed with the advanced technology in my car. I mean, America. But I got these advanced BMWs and Mercedes, and they're just computers. And I was talking to the guys, and I said, "How about sanctions? How this working?" He goes, "Well, you're going to see. We're going to start to transition to Chinese, advanced Chinese sedans." And I said, "Well, how do they compare?" He said, "Well, the problem is, from a marketing standpoint, BMW and Mercedes are known names, but he said the Chinese cars are," and I got into one of them. Oh my God. I mean, this is like you get into a literal computer. It's a moving computer. This is the coolest thing in the world. As you drive through Moscow, there's, they have the billboards and everything with the the Cyrillic writing, because I am not fluent in Russia, even though I try. You can actually program. They have a heads-up display that will capture that and translate it into whatever language you want it to be translated into. So you can read, and the car, it's like being in a fighter jet with all advanced heads-up display stuff. It is a Chinese car. I'm like, what the hell is going on here? I mean, is there an American equivalent? Does Tesla? I don't know. I can't afford this kind of stuff. But I was driven around these Chinese cars, and I asked the guy, how do you like it? And he's like, no, I love it. He said, of course, if sanctions are lifted, I'll go back to Mercedes and BMW, because when people call in, they want to be driven around in a Mercedes and BMW. He said, but when people realize how good these cars are, they're going to be asking for this, not that. So China, I'll just leave it on that. I was very impressed with the advanced models of of Chinese cars, and again, they were electric cars. So,
yeah. And I think the reports are now that Russia's car industry is, actually, there's been a record number of cars bought by Russians over the past year. 40+% of them, I believe, are Chinese, and then the rest, 17-20% are Russian, and then of course the other brands that are still being sold there from the outside. But
a lot of
this goes to show we are in a rapidly changing world, Scott, and it's going to be very interesting to see how the Trump administration 2.0, Trump 2.0 manages this, because 4 years is a long time and a lot of changes are still yet to come. But thank you everyone for joining today. It looks like Joe says the battery swaps take 3 minutes and stations are collated with petrol stations. Okay, so I Chongqing. Yes, it does happen. Yeah, I didn't get to see it myself. But I have seen the charging. It's very easy regardless of what you take. But anyway, final words, Scott, before we head out.
No, we're in a changing world, and again, America could interface with this world in a constructive way. We have a lot to offer. We can talk about America as a declining empire, but we're not a defeated empire. We're not a collapsed empire. And if you take a look at history is always full of curves, and it's very easy. I believe it's very easy for America to take this downward curve that we're on and flip it and get back up there and all that. But we do this by peacefully coexisting with people. We do this through competitive collaboration. And like I said, Trump has an opportunity. I just am afraid that he's going to blow it by trying to be a tough guy when you don't need to be a tough guy.
Yeah. I look forward to the day where a declining empire can be a society that addresses these problems and these gaps, and all of this can certainly improve the lives. We certainly have a lot of room, certainly, to improve the lives of everybody if we shift away from this warmongering. All right, everybody, we're out of here. Hit the like button as you come out of the stream. That helps keep it going. Be sure to go to the video description where you can find Scott's Telegram. That's where you can find all of his work. You can find the link in the video description. And you can find all the places to support me, Patreon, Substack, and so much more. This is the last stream of January, everybody. I'll be back the 1st of February. I'll let you know who I'll be on with. Hint, hint, it's Professor Mohammed Marandi. February 1st. Take care. Keep a lookout for that. And I'll see you then. Bye-bye.